Okay, 7th grade, we're about to dive into our activator here. Just a quick reminder with our countdown up here, 12 days until the ELA 10 ready. So all the skills that you're going to be practicing in today's Ed Puzzle lesson are going to help prepare you for that 10 ready, but also just help you grow in your 2 years of reading like our class goal, and help you become a better English student. Let's take a look at our 10 ready or just activator for this morning. It says, answer the following questions from yesterday's review quiz on chapters 1 through 4 of Code Talkers. Both of these questions were on yesterday's quiz, but the answers have been mixed up, so they look a little bit different. Question for part A says, how does the setting of the boarding school affect Ned and the other students in chapter 3? Part B says, which of the following piece of evidence from the text best supports your answer to part A? These part A, part B questions are always going to be answer and then evidence. Circle your key words, cross out wrong answers, and explain. Going to give you 3 minutes to work through number 1 and number 2. Don't forget to cross out. Don't forget to explain. And begin. Go. Alrighty, and that is time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to model through how to think through some of these 10 ready questions. Some of you guys are already doing these sort of strategies when you work through, but follow along while I do them and check your answers. So the question said, how does the setting, so we know setting is, you should circle setting, is where the story takes place. They tell you it in the question. They won't always. How does the setting of the boarding school affect Ned and the other students? Keywords in chapter 3. Let's read A. The boarding school's policies forcing them to get rid of their culture, good so far, causes them to feel temporarily saddened, but ultimately encouraged. Red flag. I know that Ned and his peers did not feel encouraged, so A is not right. B. The boarding school's policies forcing them to get rid of their culture caused them to feel completely hopeless. Now, even though they didn't like that they had to cut off their hair, I don't know if there was enough textual evidence to say that the students felt completely hopeless. Be careful of sort of like big general statements like were adverbs like completely. They felt completely hopeless. That's not true. C, the boarding school's policies forcing them to get rid of their culture caused them to get angry. And they might have felt frustrated and angry, yes, but take a look at this part. And begin to organize a resistance. They don't begin to organize a resistance. There's no textual evidence to support that. Crossed out. Correct answer is D. The boarding school's policies forcing them to get rid of their culture caused them to feel discouraged and upset. So you could have said I chose answer choice D because in Chapter 3, I remember that, whatever details you wanted to include. Jump down to Part B. Which of the following pieces of evidence from the text best supports your answer to Part A? We're looking for a piece of evidence that shows that Ned and his peers felt discouraged and upset. A, once we were inside, we were made to take off all our fine jewelry. We never saw those clothes or jewels again. I don't see any words that describe how they were feeling. It's not A. B, I remember thinking they had removed from us everything that we owned, but I was wrong. Again, I don't see any words showing that they were feeling discouraged and upset. It's not evidence B. C, but I could see from the looks on their faces that losing most of their beautiful hair made those girls feel the same way I felt naked and ashamed, especially that word ashamed, really important. And in this case, naked's meaning like lonely or upset. Key words, tie back in, support your answer up here to Part A. I think this might be the answer, but let's read D. We did not know it at the time, but some of the last names we got were, no, that has nothing to do with how they're feeling. C is the correct answer. I chose answer choice C because it shows how Ned and his friends were feeling, however you want to say it. This is what your text should look like, or your test should look like when you are marking it up. This is what I should see. I should see you circled key words. I should see you marking and crossing out. Flip the page. Let's go over our objective today. Today's objective. Mr. Wilson, will you read it? Yes, I will. Thank you. I can analyze how the author contrasts. Circle the word contrasts. Contrast means like shows the differences. Or you could just write the word differences. Remember, when you compare and contrast two things, you're telling how they're similar and different. I can analyze how the author contrasts to show the differences in the points of view of different characters in Chapter 5 of Code Talkers. You're going to see questions like this on 10 Ready. They're asking you to, how does the author contrast or show the differences between different characters' points of view? Today's lesson is going to be focused on that. So be thinking about Ned, be thinking about the different characters we meet in the chapter, and how their points of view, not how they're similar, but how they're what? How they're different. Let's go to TDQ number 1 and see what we're looking for. Some of you, I've noticed that when you're reading, only a couple of you, are reading first, and then you're coming back to the questions and running out of time. Read the questions first so you know what to be looking for. What did Ned continue to do? What did he continue to do at boarding school despite feeling bored and lonely? Let's find that. Again, as always, I will model number 1 for you, and then you're going to have to be responsible for getting the rest of them. Chapter 5, high school. We're going to see, remember that Ned was, or let's review, remember that Ned was sent to this boarding school. His teachers were really harsh. They were taking away his culture. They were disciplining him very harshly. But remember, that was more just like his middle school. Now we're going to see him graduate and move on to high school. And from there, he's going to become a code talker in the war. Some of you have been asking me, Mr. Wilson, why aren't they allowed to speak Navajo if they're trying to become code talkers? The war hasn't even broken out yet. There are no code talkers yet. Ned is just now getting into high school. Once he's in high school, then you'll see that he gets recruited to become a code talker. But let's go ahead and dive in. Again, remember, we're looking for the answer to this TDQ number 1 up here. What does he continue to do? Don't forget to annotate, underline, label any new characters, any problems. At first, my time in the boarding school did not go quickly. In fact, the days were so long that it sometimes seemed as if each one was a year. Despite the boredom and loneliness, I kept on working hard. Trying to do well became my way of surviving. I'm going to label that TDQ number 1. Circle it, label it. So, what did Ned keep doing at boarding school? Ned continued to work hard and focus on his studies. And focus on his studies. Ned continued to work hard, let me zoom out, and focus on his studies. I flipped the question. I annotated my answer. Check those off as you go so you know that you're actually doing it. Excellent job. Again, as always, I'm going to continue to read Chapter 5. Pause it as you need to. Take a look at the next question. How did some of the other students get by at boarding school? While Ned continued to work hard, what were some of the things that they continued to do? So you're going to be checking your answers for number 2, and then I'll review them at the end. All right, so let's continue to read. Trying to do well became my way of surviving. Just as some of the other students got by going somewhere else inside themselves, showing a blank and stupid face to our bilanga, which means like the white, teachers, whenever they were asked to do anything. Then, those teachers would just shake their heads and go on to something else, someone else. Most of the teachers expected very little of us, and that was just what some of us gave back in return. But that was not my way. I have always loved to learn, even though the learning they offered us was much less than that given to bilanga children. Some of my other classmates survived boarding school by throwing themselves into the sports that we played. The older boys had basketball and baseball and football teams. After we younger boys got to know those sports, which none of us had ever seen before being sent off to school, we too became great fans. Some of us wanted nothing more than to become one of these heroic Indian athletes like Jim Thorpe, who wore a sports uniform and did great things on the playing field. Whenever we played a game against other Indian schools, I was always among those cheering loudly for our side. But little I was when I came to school, and little I stayed. I grew some, but reluctantly. That means, like, not quickly. I'd never be more than a few inches above 5 feet. I was too small to play sports. I couldn't hope to become one of those athletes who recklessly threw their bodies against each other with as much energy as our warriors in the old days had hurled themselves at our enemies. Even though my body would not grow tall, somehow I knew that there was no limit to the growth of my mind. I read and studied and wrote, and my teachers noticed. I still didn't speak up much in class. That would have been calling attention to myself or embarrassing to the other students who did not do so well in their studies. Instead, I just did well on my written work, passing tests with high grades and handing in assignments done in perfect English. "Nettie, you are almost as bright as a little white child," the teachers would say, meaning to compliment me. "You should speak up more in class." Some of them would even pat me on the head, as if I were a little pet monkey that had just done well at obeying a command. "Thank you, teacher," I would answer in a voice just loud enough to be heard. Someday, I said to myself, I will become a teacher, one who does not just teach, but also shows respect to all his Indian students and expects the best of everyone. That's going to be an important quote. I worked hard with that goal in mind, because I took such interest in my studies and in that good goal of, flip the page, becoming a teacher. Time no longer crawled by like a snail trying to get to the top of a big stone. The hours and days, weeks and months, and even the years grew legs and began to run like an antelope. Almost before I knew it, the day came when I graduated from the mission school, the boarding school. For many Navajo students, this was the end of formal education. But I had done so well that I was accepted into the high school program. It made me so happy. There were two good things about the high school program. The first and best was that instead of being a journey of many days, Navajo High School was only 20 miles from my home. I would still be living in a school dormitory, but now I would be close enough to visit my parents often, and the younger brothers and sister who had been born during my years at boarding school. At the old school, I could only go home summers. Now, I would be with my family every weekend and every holiday. I have said that there were two good things about the high school program. The second was that the teaching was better. Since we had gained that much education, the high school teachers assumed that we were educable. They did not often do such things as use our entire school day cleaning the classrooms and washing the windows of the building. More information was offered to us, along with a real library. I read every book I could get my hands on and welcomed the challenge of better classes. I excelled in English and in social studies. Pause there. This is where you're going to pick up for your exit ticket. If you have not fully finished with your TDQs, go ahead and pause the video, and you may continue to answer your TDQs now. As you're looking over your answers to the TDQs, there were a couple key details that I wanted to highlight. When you got to number 2 that said, how did some of the other students get by at boarding school? We saw that Ned focused on his studies. Some of the other students, they checked out and they sort of focused on sports. When we got down to number 3, what were the teachers' expectations of the Navajo students at school? We saw that a lot of the teachers at his school had low expectations of him. There was plenty of evidence to support that. Some of these other ones are simply evidence from the text, but I wanted to highlight numbers 1, 2, and 3. Let's go ahead and, so again, if you're not done with your TDQs, you can pause the video here, get your answers down in complete sentences, flipping the question, and annotating. Let's flip to the next page. Remember, our tasks that we're focused on are our skills that we're analyzing how an author contrasts point of view. So our question says, how does the author contrast the points of view of Ned? How does he show the differences, the points of view of Ned and the other students? I'm going to work through my answer to number 1 and cross out any wrong answers. So let's see. How is Ned's point of view different from the other students? While Ned's actions show that he views sports as his ticket to a better life, many of the other students are more invested in sports than their schoolwork. Well, I know there's already a part here that's wrong because in the text, Ned did not view sports as his ticket to a better life, so that means A is wrong. B, while Ned's actions show that he sees academics as his way to achieve his goals, many of the other students, so I know that part is true, many of the other students stop trying or are more invested in sports than their homework. I know that is true. B could be my answer. Let's check C. While Ned's words illustrate that he sees his schoolwork as unessential and unimportant, I don't think that's true. I remember in the text, Ned thought his schoolwork was important. Many other students are more invested in trying to learn. That's not true. So I'm going to cross out C. My correct answer was B. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to choose between my 2 pieces of evidence. Which of the following pieces of evidence best illustrates your answer to number 1? Remember, when you come through here, I've sort of changed the stem. I say answer choice blank is a better piece of evidence because. Also, notice your explanation stem down here says these pieces of evidence illustrate differences in point of view because, explain. Also, remember you need to get your second piece of evidence. Because we've done so much practice thinking through the best pieces of evidence, I'm going to release you now into independent practice. Which one of these pieces of evidence better shows B? Come down here. Explain why this is a better piece of evidence than the other one. Find me a second piece of evidence that is not up here, and then explain. Go ahead and start that independent practice right now. Okay, so at this time, some of you are in different places. Some of you are finishing up that task 1. You're probably down here finishing up your second piece of evidence, or you're explaining. Some of you are already moving on to task 2, where you see that it's going to be the same practice 10 ready question. How does the author contrast the point of view? Choose your answer, choose your evidence, find your evidence, explain. 5 more minutes is going on the timer. You by no means are expected to be fully finished with tasks 1 and 2, but you should be continuing to work and pace yourself. Pace yourself as we're going through. We're actually going to put 10 minutes on. Keep going on your independent practice. Go. All right, so I know some of you are still finishing up task 2. Some of you have moved to that extended exit ticket where you're going to see another one of those practice 10 ready questions back here. Of course, you have just a couple quick TDQs. Finish up reading chapter 5, get to your practice 10 ready question, and then this time you're just citing one piece of evidence, the best piece of evidence to support your answer here. So if you are not finished, you can go ahead and pause the video now. If you are, I'll come around and check. But we're going to go ahead and pause our video here. Thank you for all of your hard work this week. I'm really proud of you guys and know you are going to be continued to be prepared for 10 ready. All right.